And there's a sense that we can only design Black shows, like February is like my busiest month. And I always tell people, like, I can design outside of February.
Hello, and welcome to Art Restart, where we explore how artists are reinventing their fields and building a new landscape for the arts. I'm Pier Carlo, the producer and editor of this podcast, brought to you by the Keenan Institute for the Arts at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts.
And I'm Rob Kramer, the founder and CEO of Kramer Leadership, whose mission is to advance leaders for the greater good. In this episode, we bring you our interview with lighting designer Kathy A. Perkins.
Over the course of a remarkable 45-year career, lighting designer Kathy A. Perkins has worked in theaters all over the United States and as far away as Cuba and South Africa. She has also cultivated a distinguished academic career as a theater historian, editing or co-editing several collections of plays and textbooks, including most recently the Routledge Companion to African American Theater and Performance.
As a professor, she chaired the MFA Lighting Department at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign for 20 years. And then in 2012, she joined the faculty at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she is now a professor emerita of dramatic art.
Kathy spoke to us from her home in Durham, North Carolina. We always love to profile people in our backyards, right, Rob?
Yes, indeed.
I started the interview by asking her about an upcoming project she's particularly looking forward to.
I have a book that's hopefully by the end of the week I will be sending it off to a publisher. I'm working on a new collection of plays. It's called Telling Our Stories of Home, International Performance Pieces by and about women. So that's something I'm very excited about. I have a possible Broadway show coming in the fall. I don't want to mention a name because until I have it signed in ink, I don't want to announce it. Those are two things I'm looking forward to.
Wow. Congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
Obviously, the chaos of last year created a lot of turbulence for artists. I'm curious because you specifically have a big background in the African diaspora and looking at Black artists working in the theater. Can you talk, in your opinion and perspective, of what opportunities might be presented for women and for BIPOC designers coming out of the COVID experience?
Well, we're hoping that there will be more opportunities for people of color, particularly Black people, to direct, design, have plays produced. I'm beginning to see that, with a lot of the upcoming seasons. Some of the regional theaters are becoming a little bit more inclusive. I'm hoping that this is just not a trend for a year or two, and then things go back to the way they were, which tends to be the case throughout history. I've been in the business for 45 years, and I don't get excited at moments like this because I know it'll just be a momentary thing. But I'm hoping I'm wrong because I think technology, social media is shaming people. And I think, I don't know, things may get better. Like I said, I've been in this business for 45 years, and every time something like this happened, we had the death of Dr. King, things were going to change, although I was 13 at the time. And then, every time there's some major event, it's like, oh, we need to do better. And then things will happen for a year, then we go back to the way it was. No, I would like to think that things are going to change for a long term this time around. And like I said, it could be because of social media and people are being shamed, and there are more voices out here, and the world is watching us.
You have been around a long time. I know you started off getting your
Yeah.
your BFA at Howard University in the early 70s.
Right.
So you've seen decades and decades. What does the theater scene today for BIPOC artists and designers look different from the early 70s?
I think there are more young people getting degrees, going to school, which is good. Whether they're working more, that's another story. I know, particularly in the case of Black women in lighting, and even women across the board in lighting, it has not been very easy. There's a young woman, Portia McGovern, who's a lighting designer, and I think she's been doing this for like maybe 6-7 years, where she's been doing these statistics of women working, off Broadway, on Broadway, in regional theaters. And I think maybe 2 years ago, I think the women working professionally in New York City was like less than 23%. Although we are like about 50% of the MFAs coming out of universities, the numbers are low. I think they've gotten a little better, but women don't work as much as white men. And you just don't see this on Broadway in large numbers or the regional theaters.
Right. You were saying that, you're afraid that this might be just a one-off for 1 or 2 years, a kind of a token gesture that they'll make to include people of color, then go back to normal. A lot of regional theaters, as you know, have put more concrete plans in response to social media and movements like We See White American Theater. But where do you think the greatest resistance will come from? What might you know, because you've worked all over the country, what might you know that they don't realize about the way they operate and about their fundamental beliefs?
No, they know how they operate. I mean, some will pretend that they don't know. What I'm always hearing is that we can't find black people, and that's a myth. 10 years ago, I started a Facebook page called Black Designers, and there are a lot of designers on there. They're always looking for work. And another colleague of mine, they started another website called Create Ensemble, which is actually a better site because anybody can go to it. My site is it's a private site just for black designers for discussion and, networking and everything like that. But I think, well, I know her site is much better because I'm telling people to migrate to that site because I really want to get off Facebook altogether. And this would be a site that people can easily find folks, instead of people contacting me and saying, "Oh, can you give us a list of people?" They need to, just basically hire us. And I think there's this sense that we aren't capable of designing shows. I mean, like I said, I've been in this business for 45 years. I have the same MFA degree that my white colleagues have. I've been passed over for shows by a young white guy who may have had maybe a third of the amount of experience that I've had. So there's this whole thing about, oh, a black person can't do this, or women don't understand the new technology. So, I guess you have to get these folks out of that kind of mindset. And there's this sense that we can only design black shows, like February is like my busiest month. And I always tell people, like, I can design outside of February, or I don't have to do the black show.
Right.
Although I enjoy doing black shows, that's my area of expertise is black theater. But I can do Tennessee Williams or Paula Vogel or whatever.
What do you see as most broken in the system of attracting, hiring, and retaining black artists?
I don't know. Without saying, it's just a racist business. That's the
Systemic
only way I can.
racism. Yeah,
Yeah, systemic racism.
yeah.
We've always had difficulty. Like if when you look at the history of blacks in design, it's always been difficult. I was sitting here. I was just sending a picture. There's a guy he's deceased, named George Corrin. He was the first black to go to Carnegie Mellon. And God, don't quote me with the years. I don't know if it was 39. I think he finished in 39 because he ended up getting his MFA from Yale. He was the first black person to go to Carnegie Mellon and was called Carnegie Tech at the time. I just have all these letters, going back and forth. They were making all excuses why he shouldn't be there. Because in the earlier years, it was very difficult for black men to go into theater programs at PWIs, a predominantly white institution. One, there was this fear that they would be intimate with white women. So they didn't get into these schools. It wasn't really until like the 60s, 70s that you saw black men going into acting. A lot of them had actor training either at private places or, most of them went to HBCUs. So yeah, that's part of the problem. There's a sense that we don't belong here. And I've been listening to, different people on my group. There's one guy who just said he's union. He said, he's a little younger than me. And he just says, I'm just leaving the business. They really don't want us here. So I'm just going to go out and do my own thing. And I think with this period in a way, it's sad. I think this period of this pandemic and the whole George Floyd thing, I'm seeing particularly black designers, they're thinking about just leaving the business altogether. right now there's a lot opening up in TV and film. There are a lot of black playwrights, black directors who are getting positions, and these playwrights and directors are bringing in, young black artists, and so a lot of them are migrating to TV and film. They say I can make a living. I'm working with somebody that respects me. A team of people that respects me, and so I'm seeing a lot of this happening. And there was a friend of mine who's an amazing set designer, because there's not a lot of black women set designers, and the few that I know, it's like, no, I'm working as an art director. It's like on this TV show and
Mm.
this game show. It's like, I don't think I'll go back to theater.
If you knew what you knew now, what would you have told your 24-year-old self?
Oh no, I knew what I was getting into.
Ah,
I went to an HBCU. That's very different from a black person going to a white institution.
right.
I was at Howard University in the 70s, and we had a touring house on campus. I mean, it's still there. And my advisor was the guy who ran our touring house. His name was Ralph Dines. And he was like the biggest mentor in my life. Mr. Dines, he taught me the ins and outs of the business. He was in charge of I can't, is it local 824, whatever the IA local is in DC. And at the time, I don't know if you know much about the locals, IA, it used to be segregated.
Hmm.
Anything that had A behind it, like local 1A were black people, local 2A were black people. And I think DC was 824. I can't remember, something like that, 24A. And Mr. Dines, and there was another guy named Berkeley Williams. They both worked at our touring house. And I think one had been like secretary of the union and one had been president. But they really knew the ins and out of the business. And they were so smart. What they did, the black locals began to merge with IA, because I forgot when it became a law that they could no longer be segregated. So the black locals began to merge, I think, in the 50s or 60s or something like that. And Mr. Dines was so smart. He waited until the 70s or early 80s, and I'm sorry, I should know all these dates, to merge with the white union. And it was years later when I interviewed him about all of this, because that's when I was doing my research. And I said, why did you all wait so late to merge with the white local or the main local? And he said he did this because he was trying to get as many blacks into local A as possible. So when they merged, they would be the dominant group
Mm.
in
Oh.
DC in the locals. Because usually what happened, what he noticed, that when a lot of these black locals merged with the main local, you began to see fewer and fewer blacks getting in, because the officers were still predominantly white, and actually basically they were white. I mean, things have changed somewhat now, but I just thought that was so smart of him. And, when I told him that I was seriously thinking about pursuing lighting and career, he said, come to my office, set aside an hour and a half. We need to talk. And he sat and talked to me. He just said, you're a black woman. You're here in DC. This is family. 90% of the people you work with are black. It's going to be a whole different world when you get out here, when you go to grad school, when you start working. He says, you're going to be humiliated. You're going to need to expect this, and you cannot take this stuff. Well, yeah, you should take it personally, but this is the way the business works. You're going to be overlooked for people who are going to be mediocre. So I was prepared, so when I got it, there, nothing was new.
What did it take for you to finally feel like you've reached a place where you feel like you've broken through and have established yourself as a credible, sought after artist?
That's an interesting question. In a way, I I've been sought after, and but it was mainly within my black community. And for me, like I said, coming from an HBCU, that was important for me, because when I left Howard or Michigan, my goal was not Broadway. I mean, my goal was to work at a place like the Negro Ensemble Company, which I did, because I was there during the time with Felicia Rashad and Denzel Washington. Well, between the Negro Ensemble Company and the New Federal Theater. For me, that was like success. If I happened to get to Broadway, that was fine. Although I did assist my Another mentor was Shirley Pendergrass, and she was like the only one, still the only one, the first Black woman to design on Broadway. She did several shows, and I was told to look her up, and when I got to New York, and I did, and she was a big mentor of mine. I assisted her on a Broadway show, and this was like 1980, I think. And she trusted me. She says, "Why don't you go in 2 hours before me and start focusing? You can start doing all the backlight and the downlight, because that's what's easier to do." And so I get to the theater at 8 o'clock. My call was at 8. The other thing is, I have a very white name. I've been told Kathy Perkins is a white name. And then when people look at my resume, the only thing that gives away that I'm a Black woman is that it's Howard University. And a lot of people don't know anything about HBCUs. So if you don't know Howard University, you will assume I'm white. I went to University of Michigan. I have an MFA. I worked in Europe. And just because I designed Black shows doesn't mean anything, because most Black shows are designed by white designers. So that doesn't mean anything. So looking at my resume, it's assumed that I'm a white woman. So anyway, so I go into the theater. It's 8 o'clock, and you all worked in the theater. In the back then, you had what was called an A frame. It's a ladder. It's shaped like an A. So you have to have four people, a guy on each end of the ladder, and then the fifth person goes up. So you have to have a five people, 5-person crew. That's the union standard. So I walk in, and I introduce myself, and the five white guys on the ladder, they sort of look at me. It's like, really? And then one guy proceeds to say, "I ain't working with this," and walks away. He didn't even say, "I'm not working with her." He says, "I ain't working with this." And he leaves. He walked away, and I looked at the supervisor, the master electrician, and I said, "Well, what are you going to do about that?" It's like, we're on a clock. Time is money, and this is Broadway. And this is my first time working in a Broadway house. And he says, "Oh, we're the brotherhood." I don't know. He started telling me all this crap about we're IA brotherhood, and I can't really do anything to him. And I said, "Well, I've got to focus the show. What are you going to do?" "Well, I'm going to call so and so who lives in Jersey somewhere." And I'm looking at my watch, and I said, "That's like an hour away in rush hour. He's got to come across the George Washington Bridge. He's not going to get here before 9. Like, well, there's nothing I can do about it." And so everybody take a coffee break. And my reaction was I wanted to just cry. And I was listening to Mr. Dine's voice, like, "Don't ever let anybody make you cry." He said, that's the worst thing." You said, "Don't ever let anybody make you cry." It's like, you don't cry on stage, you go to the bathroom and then cry. Don't ever let anybody see you cry. And so I always taught my female students, like, don't let anybody make you cry. Because, but I wanted to cry, no, not so much because I felt humiliated, like I said, I was prepared for all of this, but I wanted to cry because I felt that I had disappointed my mentor. I mean, Shirley Pendergrass, the designer. So she's going to come in, and it's like, how do you explain to her that I wasted 2 hours? She was very understanding. It's like, I know exactly what's going on. It's fine.
Are you seeing changes in diversity in the unions, in the technical unions that you work with?
Yes, for the first time in history, USA has two Black officers, two or three, and one Asian officer. Yes, that has happened during the pandemic.
Wow. In
Hmm.
2020, it took that long.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure they're the first Black officers.
As a lighting designer, out of all the designers, maybe sound designers too, I think lighting designers always have to keep up with technology and keep having to learn new stuff. You always have to be on your toes.
Constantly.
Do you mentor differently now than you might have 10, 15 years ago?
No, not really. I'm not teaching anymore. I haven't taught in 2 years, but I'm finding myself mentoring a lot. I don't know if it's because I have time. I don't know if it's because of the Black Facebook page, or maybe there are more uh, young, more Black women going into the field. In fact, I'll be speaking with a young Black woman tomorrow. who recently got her MFA from Tulane. And so, I try and help them find work, either teaching or designing. I usually try and encourage them to do both. It's great to freelance, and this was something that I learned because teaching was never something that was on my agenda. It was just something I got into by accident, and then I realized how much I love teaching. And also because I'm a researcher, and I found that being connected to a university was very advantageous, in terms of getting grants and stuff like that. And it allowed me to travel. Also, teaching, I'm in tune with the latest technology because, even if my school can afford it or not, ETC is going to bring this to us, and it's like, we want you to see this, or going to USITT, which is great. I get to see what other professors are doing, and you get to see the latest technology. So for me, teaching had its advantages, but I would always tell my students, if you're going to teach, make sure you're still designing, because you don't want to get, stuck just, being in that school. That makes you a valuable teacher because you have professional experience to bring back to your students.
What do you think in your conversation with her tomorrow? What do you think is the most important piece of advice you're likely to give her?
Well, I've already spoken to her years ago.
Yeah.
It's like,
Oh,
this is
yeah.
not an
Okay.
easy business for a Black woman, so you have to understand that. And I
Right.
think she's very clear on that, and I'll just reiterate it. But I'll just tell her, if this is your passion, you have to pursue it. You're going to hear no a lot, but don't take that as defeat. Just take it as, okay, there's something better for me, and I'll just move on. That's the way I've always operated. I never accepted no as defeat, and that's something I learned not even from my advisor, but just growing up in a segregated, Alabama. It's like, if they say no, it's their loss, because you're better than what they need anyway. So just move on. If doors don't open for you, you build your own. That's always been my philosophy.
Kathy is an artist who, just by the nature of her committing to her career, was an art restarter decades ago, right?
Right.
I mean, it's amazing to think that should this Broadway gig work out, let's hope it does, she'll only be the second Black female lighting designer to light on Broadway in 2021.
That's unbelievable.
So surely Prendergast broke a ceiling, but there's still a lot of that ceiling left to break, right?
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I really enjoyed hearing from her was that, Broadway and that kind of success was not her goal, right? She had a
Yeah.
clear idea of what she wanted her career to look like, which is to amplify the work and voices of Black artists in the American
Mm-hmm.
theater.
Mm-hmm.
Broadway, the fact that Broadway came late in her career is kind of just a cherry on top of this rich career Sunday of hers.
Mm.
I think there's a lesson there in terms of creating personally meaningful goals, defining what success is specifically for you, and sticking to it rather than reaching for the same brass ring that everyone else is reaching for. And also, you have to, I think the other lesson I hear from her is you have to find your allies early
Big
and
time.
stick with them. She had mentors, which is crucial,
Big time.
and then deciding to work with then very young Black companies. She had people who aligned with her values and
Yes.
could keep her on track.
Yeah. And I want to say something about the champions, allies idea. When it comes to mentors, one of the tricks that I think often doesn't get discussed is that mentors come and go. And so the person who's the right mentor for you at the right time, that's a chapter in life. And when they become no longer the right mentor, it's having the willingness to let that relationship go, which sometimes can be painful, especially for the mentee who has become so sort of, I don't want to say reliant, but guided by the advice of the mentor. But having the wherewithal to recognize, okay, that chapter is closing and it's time for me to let that relationship go as well, at least from a mentor mentee standpoint, and move on. And she did. She had people at the right times offering her the right insights. And eventually she became the mentor to young artists,
Yeah,
which is
right.
just so powerful. I hope that someday Kathy's going to write an autobiography about everything she's done because she's got way too many amazing and crucial stories, not to share. She really could be one of those icons that are just unknown.
Yeah, she herself is a crucial part of our theater history.
Yep.
If you'd like to learn more about Kathy and see some of her lighting designs, please visit uncsa.edu/artrestart. If you enjoyed this interview, please let us know by leaving us a rating wherever you get your podcasts.
And don't forget to subscribe. There's some wonderful interviews coming down the pike.
Our theme music is by Shanghai Restoration Project. I'm Pier Carlo Talenti.
And I'm Rob Kramer. Thanks so much for listening.